Hello everybody, I'm here today to go over some pond design and pond modeling. We are back on the same sample project that we've been using on our 3D design and modeling projects before. A little background, I've extended the limits out a little bit further so that we have a right end condition here to start using for the edge of this pond, the north edge of the pond. The existing roadway comes down here and has a tight curve, and that existing roadway is to be removed. We have a proposed roadway with a flatter curve coming through, so we're going to end up with a little bit of a remnant area that we're going to put a pond in. This is an existing canal. The top of bank is about elevation 21.5. We have a stipulation where we cannot have water flowing from our pond berm into the canal, so rather the water needs to flow away from the top bank. Down on the south side here, we're going to essentially use the existing edge of pavement as our top of berm line. And for the north/east side, we kind of need to figure out where that top of berm needs to sit. So what we're going to do is use an elevation of 20 for the top of berm all the way around the pond. So what I need to do is get this tie down line to come and hit elevation 20 so that I have an idea of where elevation 20 sits as it ties down from 1 to 4 from the back sidewalk buffer. So right now we have the 1 on 4 is tying down to existing ground, but so we need to make an exception to that end condition. So we're going to come up to corridor objects, click on our corridor, and come down to end condition exception and add new. So what I've set up here is these two construction lines. They're 90-degree angles from the center line, just to kind of give me some limits for the end condition exception that I want to create here. We're going to call it pond, to the right override, and I'm going to snap to those two boundaries that I created. That should bring us into the template dialog here. So we're basically seeing the sidewalk buffer end condition template, except we're going to make an override to this end condition. So we're seeing the current end condition is going down to the train model. We want to change that to an elevation, and we want to go to 20 and apply. We also need to make sure that this point is just freestanding right now, so it doesn't have a slope or anything constrained. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and add constraint, full constraint to here. And I'm doing that just to set some constraints for now. We're going to double click on that. And we want to make sure that end condition is infinite is checked. So essentially when we check that, this horizontal constraint doesn't really matter because it's going to make that line as long as it needs to be to achieve elevation 20. What we really want to focus on is changing this vertical to a slope. And we want to make sure that that's our 1 on 4, so minus 25%. Hit apply, close, and then come up here and hit OK. And it's made it so that our end condition is going down to elevation 20 throughout the limits of that end condition exception that I've created. So now that we have that, I want to turn off some of these lines here. I guess it doesn't really matter, we can leave them on. What I want to do next is set up my arc that I'm going to use for my top of berm elevation, and that arc needs to sit just outside of where this is tying down to elevation 20 so that I can make sure that I always have a 1 on 4 slope or slightly flatter throughout the entire limits of that top berm. So I'm going to go on my construction lines green here, and I'm going to go single offset partial, and I want to go on my construction line here, and I'm going to snap to the intersection of that construction line and center line. And I'm going to come out here, I'm going to hit N to get off of that, but I want to, and if I hit right, so this is doing an end distance based on stationing. I want to do an end distance based on distance from my first snap point. So I know that I'm somewhere in here. I need to be somewhere in here. So we can use 71.2. And so that's given me a line just barely outside there that has a 71.2 foot width from the center line. So I'm essentially setting up begin and end points for this arc. I need to do the same thing down here, single offset partial, and I want to make sure I'm snapping to intersection here, and hit end, and right arrow, and looks like about 52.5 will work. Okay, so I have those two lines. Now I'm going to switch over to my construction lines green dash because I'm going to make a guide essentially for where I want my top of berm to be. And when we go into the pond model file, I'm going to be drawing lines over the top of that. So anytime I draw lines, I know I'm going to be drawing lines over the top of another construction line. I like to make sure it's dashed. So we're going to draw an arc between points, and I want to start, end, and pass through type arc. So what that's going to let me do is click a start point, end point, and then the pass through, you can either click a point or define a radius. So I want to come in here, click to the end of that line, and click to the end of this line. And since I've done this before, I know it's 1150, gives me a really good fit here. So you can see that it fits really well if you made 1050 or whatever. Let's just change this to 1050. Doesn't fit as well. If you ever decided that you needed to change this elevation to 19, for example, you would go change your end condition exception to elevation 19, but you would also need to change this offset to something else. So let's say we change that to 75. Now, the nice thing about using that extra construction line there is that the begin point of this arc is snapped to the end point of that line. So if this changes, that moves with it. It maintains this, it still has its radius, and it still has its end point. So if you ever need to come back and change something, you can change your end condition exception, and then you have these lines that you can adjust to make everything fit again. So it's pretty easy to make this go back. We want to go back to 71.2, and we want to go back to 1150. So now we have a really nice line that we can use to construct the top of berm of the pond. So what you're going to want to do next is you're going to create your pond model file. You're going to go to FDOT, you're going to go to create file, and you're going to go roadway design, and create this model file. I'm not going to hit create open file right now because I have a model file set up for us, and we'll get there next. Alright, now we're here in the model file I've created. I've gone ahead and called it model RD03 pond, and I've attached all of the things that we're going to need, set up our views, and we should be good to go here. So we've already got our north/east edge of the pond here. We know it's going to be there. What we need to start doing is kind of setting up our other edges here. So I'm going to go ahead and go on another green dash here. And I could use my right-of-way line here maybe. Let's go ahead and just use the right-of-way line. So all my right-of-way lines are they're complex elements. They're civil geometry. So I should be able to offset them. You can offset normal lines as well, but it's always better if there's civil geometry. They're a lot easier to move. I'm just trying to think. I want to make sure that I can still get. We're gonna have a radius here and a radius over here. So I want to set up my bottom one first, my south one, just to make sure that we look all right here. So let's do single offset. No, I'll do single offset partial. And I'm just going to offset this right-of-way line, and I'm going to end so I can get my line. Let's see. Edge of pavement's at about 33. Let's just call it 34. And We're just going to draw it, and I got to hit N to get off that. Okay, so then we have that. So there's our south limits. And I think what I'm going to do is just draw a line on top of this just to be safe. Just so I have the full length of this to play with. So now that's just a freestanding line, but I know it's sitting on top of the right-of-way line. And let's just offset it about 5 feet for now. Okay, so now we have our limits, and we can go ahead and start setting up our pond lines here. But the first thing I want to do is, when you're doing a model that closes on itself or is circular in this example, you want to make sure it doesn't exactly close on itself. You want to have like a tiny little gap somewhere so that, like, when you do a profile, for example, it still thinks it's a line and not a closed shape. I know this was a thing back in the SS4, SS10 days, and I don't know if it's still a thing in ORD, but it really doesn't hurt to do it, and it's pretty easy to do. So what I end up doing here is I create this line from element by angle, and we'll just go off of this line, and I can kind of tell where this pond is going to be. I want to kind of put it like somewhere in the middle of this south edge here. So I can just click here, and we'll go 90 degrees, and I'm just going to do this. So I'm doing green for go, so it's going to go clockwise around, and I'm going to do a red dash for stop, and I'm just going to offset it like 0.1. Doesn't have to be anything. Just this little tiny gap to make sure that everything closes all right. So now we want to go on our ponds, and I don't use that one. I use we can just use pond controls fine. Doesn't really matter. I know there's something called retention area in here. Maybe it's slopes. There it is. Retention area. That's the one I usually use. So what I want to do is first set up my arcs here. I'm going to do arc between elements, simple arc, and keeping in mind that I'm going clockwise, so I want these things to at least draw them in the correct direction that they're going. So I'm going to start here, go here, and we're going to do like a 50. Except it's doing something weird. There we go. And I hit Alt, and it'll flip it for me. And we don't want any trims or extensions. So then I'm going to do the same thing up here. 50. Same thing over here. Keeping in mind I'm going clockwise around. So now I've got the arcs. So now I can start doing my single offset partials. So what I want to do is start along this line. We gotta go to 0 offset. And I'm going to come up and snap to the green for go. And then we're going to snap to here. We're just going to keep going around, drawing this stuff. So now I'm using the line from the other file for where that elevation 20 comes down from the road. I'm going to do one last line here. We're going to go to there. So you can see they barely don't line up, which is okay. So we're going to complex these guys together. And let's make sure on auto. All right. Now we need to set an elevation. So let's go ahead and profile by constant elevation. 20. Now we got our pond sitting out there. So there's the top bank. Pretty easy to set that part up. So to begin doing that corridor, we're just going to want to click on here, but the first thing I want to do is I'm going to turn off the default 3D that's showing up here because I don't want this extra line showing up. So what you were seeing is it was a little bit yellow because we were seeing that default 3D model coming through. I'm going to click on my thing here. I want to give it a name actually. Let's just call this pond test, just so we have a name. I like to name my lines. I might even come in here and start naming, this pond test south boundary, something like that. Um, you can go ahead and name some of these other lines. Sometimes it's a good idea to start naming your lines because you might create all these construction lines and then kind of forget what the heck they are or what they're supposed to be doing, so the name can give you a little bit of a hint as to what it does. It also helps if you're using that as a point control or parametric constraint or anything else, that name will show up in the point control so that you know, okay, that's what that's supposed to be doing. Just a good idea to give your things names if you remember. It'll save you some headaches later when you have construction lines everywhere and you have no idea what anything is. So like, this one we could just call pond test. Because somebody might come in here later and not know why we did this. And you can just copy and paste. Call this end. So there's that. So let's go ahead and create this corridor. We're going to click on it and we're going to create corridor. And I'm going to reset for the active profile because there's already an active profile on it because we set that on based on the elevation of 20. So the corridor name is going to match the name of the line we just did. So that's kind of why I put the name on there. And now it wants us to. Sometimes that's sitting there. I don't always trust that. I always go and actually grab this on variable tie. There. Now it's got the full path. Sometimes that doesn't work right if you don't do that. So I'm going to look at what I want this to do. So I know that I'm going to have some variable tie probably as I come. Let's see. Let's just start with the 1-on-4 tie and see what that does as it ties down here. Maybe we can get that 1-on-4 to work in the beginning. So we're going to click our begin. And then probably once I get somewhere in here, let's just say to here, and let's do a 5. Let's do a 5 drop. Okay, so we're starting to build that. And you can see already we're kind of having a problem where I'm having some water coming back to me, but that's not necessarily a problem either. Maybe you want that. Now we can change this over to the variable tie because I know for sure that I want to be tying to that pond berm, or I'm sorry, the canal berm. And we're probably going to be doing that all the way around through here. And we can have that variable tie cut through here. Let's just do it all the way around to here. So now we're building our pond. You can see that that thing's just hanging out there waiting for a point control to tie. And let's just finish off this with a 1-on-4. And you can see I'm just trying to snap to I try to snap to the arcs. It doesn't really matter. I guess you could snap to the tangents too, just in case you ever wanted to change something, and we can go over that once we get this built a little bit. And I want to snap to that. All right. So now we got this pond built, but we have no bottom. So what we need to do is get a bottom. So I'm going to create a terrain from elements. And I want to do a break line. So I pretty much always use break line when I'm creating these types of things, and I keep my max triangle length pretty low. That helps me kind of get a much better a much better solution, I guess, less triangles. So what I'm trying to do is select this point, this pond bottom point. If I select that and I reset the add, and then I'm just going to call this pond past bottom, and I'll just put on DTM top mesh. That's usually a good thing to use. Boom. Now we got a bottom. So the other thing we need to do is we just have a terrain here, so I need to go ahead and put. I should probably do that a little slower. I'm left clicking, getting the context menu, going to templates, going to apply surface template, and I'm going to apply. You should have these surface templates. These are in the standard FDOT template library. You can come grab these. Some of these I've modified or made new surface templates, but there should be a SOD one in there. And you can just kind of click through and data point to accept. And if we go ahead and turn off DTM top mesh, we got some grass. So that's a really easy way to get your pond in there. And what's pretty neat about this is, if you end up finding out like, you wanted this pond bottom to be changed, it looks like we got some more room. So we could come in here and do, let's do 12. No, let's do 10. So I wanna try and break it. See if I can break it. So I had to change both the templates. Neat thing in ORD now is you don't have to select each individual template to synchronize. You can select the corridor and it synchronizes all the templates in the corridor. So here's what I was talking about. I kind of broke it. I got down here where I can't have a radius down here anymore. So I've designed ponds where we artificially put a radius down here, but I don't like doing that because it makes things look weird and it's not concentric, and those kind of things bother me, so I try not to do them. So what we can do here is now we need to make this radius bigger so that we can have a radius down here. So let's try and make it, let's see, 60. 60 still doesn't work. 65. So 65. So you can see everything changed. Our bottom terrain changed. Everything changed. Nice and easy. So we can go over here and we can change. Let's get on this one. We can change this to 65. Boom. Now we have a bottom again. Good bottom radius. So this one's going to make the pond look crazy because this is a much tighter corner. So it shrinks it down even more. That's how easy it is to set everything up so that it's very easy to change. What about if I wanted to have a different offset from here? Because I've set up this relationship, I have this construction line on this right away, and now it's 5 foot. What if I wanted this to be 20 feet? Moves over 20 feet, no problem. Same thing with this line down here. We can do the same thing. Move that around to try and get that adjusted. So that's basically how you get a pond in here. And the next thing we can do is try to, maybe on this side, I'm going to make this point tie to the top of bank elevation. So what we need to do is get this top of bank into my file. And I really only have a topo line from here to here. So I'm going to kind of guess on the rest of this. So we'll go ahead and copy this in. And I believe we've done this before in some of our videos. I want to go ahead and turn this topo off a second so I can see that line. And I've made this handy toolbar here. So I have my drop here now, which is really neat. So I've got that, dropping it to line strings. And I'm going to select all these guys real quick. Got them all. Okay. And let's go back to construction lines, green dash. Let's change it to something else. Let's do blue dash so we don't get it confused with our other green dashes over here. Um, I don't. I try to have a little bit of a rhyme or reason with which color I use, but usually it's just whatever I'm feeling like doing that day. Um, there's a few things that make sense that I typically do all the time, but other than that, I just try not to confuse myself too much with the same color over and over again. So we want to create civil rule feature. Make sure that's toggled on. All right, so these are all ruled now. So one thing, we could get into some a little more advanced here where let's just say I wanted to, because this slope is not going to be up here. It's going to kind of come in here, and then we want it to round into here somehow. So I won't do that just yet. I just want to get into how I would point control this real quick. So let's just try to point control this edge for right now. So I'm going to kind of follow that same that same clockwise direction, and I'm going to go on here. And I know I want this to be existing ground, so I just set the existing ground here. And go on our corridor, get our bucket. We're going to set up a point control. And I'm just going to do it for this edge for right now. Well, let's see. We can get it all the way up to, can snap to the end of this point if we want. So you'll see it'll start flaring out. So this is going to be called pond test west tie. Just give it something. Doesn't have to be rocket science, but something that makes sense. And we know we want it to be this pond tie point. So in this case, I want it to be both. I want horizontally and vertically constrained. And we are choosing linear geometry in this case. And I just have to grab that point. And then just clicking through the rest of these, use a secondary alignment. That changes the direction of the tie things to this alignment that we're choosing. Typically, you don't want to do that. There are a few times where you might want to do something like that, but this is not one of them. So I'm just clicking through all the options, and now it's tying. So what I have going on up here is there's a lot more that in the final design that happens here. There's a new culvert here. There's a bunch of wing walls. I'm not going to get into that today, but I really just wanted to show how you can set up this point control so we can see, we basically achieved what we wanted to do. Water is flowing away from that top point into our pond, which is good. So over here, we're basically making a little bit of a high point right out here. So we're collecting all the water, and then the rest of it's going into that ditch, which is fine. If I was doing this, as an actual project, I would probably try and get this to do the same situation where maybe I would turn this topo back on and try to get this point to tie to that top of bank. And then another thing you can do is if you didn't get a line in your topo, you can go into here and turn your overrides on and turn your triangles on. And you can so here's where they drew that top of bank in there. But then I kind of lost, they drew another line in here that got kind of lost. So, or it's this one of these top of banks. So you kind of find your top of bank line, and then you can almost try to connect the dots of the triangles. You can set up your own construction line like this one using the triangles. I believe that's what I did in the final design of this little remnant basin area. is just created my own top of bank line by looking at the triangles and looking at my cross sections and figuring out where, my top of bank actually was, if I wasn't provided that point in the topo. So we turn those back off. So that's basically how you can set up that point control. The next thing we need to do now is turn off the fill slope here so that my road starts coming down and hitting that pond. So what we need to do now is do a parametric constraint, and we're going to add new. And so before I do that, what I'm going to do is try to set myself up a line here to use, because I have this here, which is going out and snapping to the end of that line. So what I need to do is, I can't just snap. I guess I could snap to this, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to go from here all the way out to, I want to grab that and go at 90. All right, so now I have that point, and I can create my parametric constraint, and let's unlock everything, and we're gonna start it there. And let's just go out to, let's just call it here for now. So this is, I guess we don't have to type this in. We need to find the label, Anti-switch, click, and I just do it. I just usually say 10 when I know I'm turning something off. Now it's off. And another thing we can do here is just maybe we, once we come back to this other file, we can kind of set up a line that we know that we want to come down and stop this at. So let's just do this. Let's just set up a line here that we can use. Whoa, that's not right. Didn't set it up 90 degrees. Something close here. And then I can, so I can go in my parametric constraint here and click this graphical edit. And now I can snap it to the end of this line. Now that it's ruled there, the line can move the parametric constraint, which is pretty nice. So what I can do here is I can kind of figure out how this is going to tie down. Eventually I would come in here and put a driveway. I'm not going to cover that today. That's a little bit more significant detail modeling, is adding the driveway. But I do want to finish off showing how we get this slope to kind of tie down to here, which now that we have this slope turned off, we can go over to the other file, our end condition right file, and turn off this end condition exception and create a point control to come down and tie to our top of berm. All right, now that we're back in our end condition right file, we can start cleaning up some of this. So the first thing we want to do is come into our end condition right corridor, and I want to turn off this end condition exception. Okay. So what that kind of allowed me to see here is where this normally ties down, and kind of gives me an idea of what we maybe need to do when we go back into the pond file, and we can clean some of this up here, get this to work out a little better. But what we're going to do is I need to add a new template in here, and we're going to go add new. And I just grabbed this template. It's called pond tie. So it kind of works similarly to the pond template that we just did that has the variable tie point out here. That's all that is. Instead of having a 1-on-4, it has a variable point that I can control. So I'm kind of sticking this in between two templates, so it's going to create a break I'm sticking this in the middle of a current template drop, so it's going to create a break in that template, split it into two, and then put it on either side. So right now I'm just snapping to this, and we're going to do a drop of 5. All right, so you can see right now it has nothing to snap to. It's a little off there. So we need to create a point control, add new, and I'm going to do it for the same limits from here to here. And we're going to call this pond test top berm tie. So our point is going to be this right pond tie, and we're going to do both. And this time, instead of doing linear geometry, I want to do a corridor feature. And click that. Now I can locate the corridor. I can grab this pond corridor, and then I can come over here in my 3D view and grab the feature that I want to grab. You can also, do it in the drop downs, but I found this to be much simpler. Then I'm just clicking through the rest of the stuff. Boom. Ties right down there. Now the next thing we need to do is figure out how to clean up this remnant area. What I've done is go into my Explorer, OpenRoads standards, file name, feature definition, linear, roadway design, template points, and come into my fill, right-click properties. I've turned this create template geometry to true, and this linear feature symbology to construction lines yellow dash. Once you change that, you need to come over to process corridor and process your corridor so that this yellow dashed line will show up. So I'm going to turn off this corridor line, this template. I'm turn off all my template stuff so I can see what I'm doing now. So what I need to do is figure out how I want to clean this up. And after looking at it a little bit, I think what I want to do is create some sort of construction lines green dash here. And it's going to kind of cut in between here somewhere. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I could pick it. I'll probably, if I was doing this, as an actual design, I'd probably pick an even station or something like that. But my thought is I want to arc off of here to get going this way and then arc back to here so that all this stuff kind of is able to merge together a little more cleanly. And what I'm going to do out here is I can see that I want to use this pond line so that this line just kind of extends all the way through here. And so I don't want to rule anything to this yellow line here because that is based on the corridor. So what I usually do here is I'll just draw something on top of it like that so I can get the intersection. So now I have that. And let's see, can we turn that off? Or does that turn off all the constructions? That does turn off all the constructions. So then I want to come up here and do another construction line from here and snap to the intersection of my two green lines. I'm going to make sure I'm not getting that yellow line because I don't want anything ruled to the corridor line. So we're going to do that. And I need to turn my template drops back on real quick. So I want to make this standard 1-on-4 template drop. I want that to end right there where this normal 1-on-4 full slope crosses my guideline for my pond. So it's going to bring it all the way back to there. Now I need to bring this guy up to that same line. Whoops, that is not the right line. No problem. That line. So the reason I did this line here is I didn't want it to be on this yellow line because it was going to go, that point that was here was going to go away as soon as I pulled that template like that. So now what I need to do is, we could probably make this even more simple and just have this come right up in here and then have this come down. So what I need to do is make this line. Let's remove this a minute. So I know that I want to make this active profile existing ground. What I'm trying to set up is a line along this that connects these 2 points vertically. So I know it looks like it's a little bit off. It keeps doing that where it, every time I move that point, it's going to change that yellow line a little bit. Let me see something here. All right. So now this is going to be the point control through here. So I needed an elevation here, which is the existing ground. So I got that, and I already have an elevation there. So I should be able to pull this up. This a little taller. Thing. Profile intersection point. Grab your line. Let's grab this. And grab the pond. So you can see it's pretty flat there. We're gonna connect those 2 dots. Okay. So that's gonna be my fill slope now. So I can either turn on my corridor, or you can do this thing where you come to your model. Sometimes it's nice to use this. Order objects, point control. So I want to set up that point control from here. I can either select that or I can select the line, doesn't really matter. Something that I know isn't going to change. This is pond test. We'll call this west tie. And I want to grab that right pond tie. Do both again. Whoop, I don't want to do corridor feature this time. I want to do linear geometry because I want to select that line. And I think I messed it up. Okay, let's restart that. I messed it up by selecting corridor geometry, corridor feature. Pond tie west, point, right pond tie, linear geometry. Accept the construction lines, click all the way through everything. Boom. So now we've got that piece. So all I really need to do is, I don't really even need this line anymore. And you could use this and do that idea I was kind of thinking of before, but this might be the more practical solution just because you can kind of hold that top of bank here and make sure all that water is going that way towards your pond. That'll help you avoid any, because you might end up getting like a little low spot in here or something that you don't want. But this is just an example of any number of ways you could tie these things together. So what we need to do now is go into our pond file and finish off these point controls. So we'll go into that file now. All right, now we're back in that pond file, and the one problem I have is this line, this existing ground line that I had created originally isn't long enough to get up to there. So what I'm going to end up doing is I want to turn off this corridor real quick. I'm going to turn off the topo. And I want to just drop this again. So it's going to break the point control. So that'll go away. Okay. So now I've got this dropped into lines again. I always like to start with this, so I'm making sure I'm not ruling this stuff to anything. Yeah, let's just do this real quick because I kind of do want to rule it to there. So let's go back to our geometry and grab that, and then I do kind of want to rule this point. Let's just snap it right to there. Because I know that that endpoint's already snapped to that intersection, so that should be good. But I know like that point isn't ruled to that point, which is, I mean, it's fine. We could have just done this. It's not going to hurt anything. So now we need to complex that together. Do this again. Okay. Now you can see that point control goes all the way up to there. And we can get rid of this thing because we don't need that anymore. And I want to turn on this because I think we need to change the way these template drops are set up. And then we can do our point controls. Oh, it's the parametric constraint. Okay. So we want that parametric constraint to be turned off when it gets to here. Whoops. I'm making a new one. Okay. Good. Now our first point control. Let's go from here all the way up to here. This is pond test west tie. Yep, that's good. Pond tie. Linear geometry. Grab your element. Click through everything. Boom. All right. So it's kind of not showing some of that for some reason. I believe that's going to be resolved when we do this next one. So now I need to go from, I'm going to select this green line, swing it all the way around to here. This, we'll call this north tie. Do our pond tie again. Both. Linear geometry. This guy. Now we have that nice clean connection between everything. We can see it looks like all the water's coming back towards the pond like we were intending. You know, if it was required, maybe there's going to be a ditch bottom inlet in here somewhere, but that's something we can evaluate. You know, once you get looking at the slopes and everything, it looks like there might be a little bit of a low spot back there, but it should be easy enough to put a ditch bottom inlet there to make sure that none of that water flows in. So that's just kind of an example there of how you can go about fixing all the rest of these. So you can do the same thing over here, and you can kind of do the same thing down here. You can just continue setting up linear geometry and point controls to tie down to points that you need. You can shift your templates around so that sometimes you have your standard 1-on-4, sometimes you have your point control tie on there. There's one more thing I could cover in a future video if people are interested, and that is putting some sort of driveway on here. Pond that I created for this project had a driveway that was here, and then it came into here, and we had some sod that kind of comes this way, so there's a big green area right here. There was a lot of concern for access in there, getting a large vehicle for maintenance and stuff like that in there. So if there's enough interest in doing something like that, that is a video I can do in the future. But for now, I think that pretty much covers everything as far as getting a pond in here, using the correct templates, setting up that start-stop point. starting out, setting up your control line here, your guide line, and getting everything in there. So hope everyone liked the video. Again, put a comment down there if you're interested in seeing the driveway added to here, and that can be added in a later video. But thank you very much for watching.